Hey, what's up guys? My name is Jedith, and this video is a plea for help, a cry out to the devs. You know, I tried doing this myself on Twitter. It got some traction, but I don't think it actually had any results, any tangible results, right? So if you guys haven't seen this is a Twitter post that I made a while ago, kind of outlining everything that we have found that's just kind of wrong with Havoc right now, everything that's holding it back, everything that's making it unenjoyable to play and just kind of a drag. In this video, we have a whole bunch of points to go through. I even included little pretty pictures for all you visual people. I'm one of them. So when I originally wrote this, it was going into patch 10.1.5, and they announced that they were going to be doing some class overhauls and balancing to certain classes. So they made this post and they said balance and tuning is coming for mages, rogues, holy paladins, and more. So obviously I was very upset to not see Havoc there. There's a little bit of hope because maybe we were included in the and more, right? So I wrote, seeing class updates on the horizon for patch 10.1.5, I can only hope that Havoc DH is included in and more. Havoc suffers from many issues involving design, playability, public perception, and raw output. So this post, this thread got 33.5 thousand views, which is pretty good for me on Twitter. I get a couple likes every post. You know, this got 33,000 views, so a lot of eyes were on it. So the first post is momentum fatigue. Coming into Dragonflight, changes were made to momentum, which made it a permanent fixture of all Havoc builds. Fell Rush and Vengeful Retreat are, as crucial parts of the rotation, force players to have an environmental awareness that no other DPS spec deals with. So just for context, this is what is posted on the Wowhead class guide for Havoc Demon Hunter. It says, planning out your Fell Rush and Vengeful Retreat rotational movement makes a large impact to DPS. You should step away from the pack or boss you're in combat with before you Fell Rush, or you can spin around and Vengeful Retreat backwards across to not leave melee range and continue using GCDs smoothly. So this is something that like no other DPS spec, as far as I know, has to really worry about to this degree. So keeping tabs on everything in basically 360 degrees around you while having to time an 8-second and 20-second ability with mechanics, right? Plus executing a burst window every 40 seconds, along with other maintenance upkeeps like Soul Rend, Serrated Glaive, and Demonic. It's all pretty exhausting, right? You're trying to keep track of this. You're spinning so many plates, and throughout a 4-hour raid night, it gets tiring, man. And you know, sometimes you're raiding 4 nights a week. If you're real sweaty, you're doing 4 nights a week. Some people just do 3. Some people might be doing 2. Doesn't matter. It's still really exhausting to have to spin that many plates for that long. So yeah, the majority of encounters have limiting factors that work against the momentum playstyle. They may not always be obvious, but even something like a bad patch of swirlies on the ground can affect how we Fell Rush and negatively affects our damage. So this is just like the most obvious example, right? This is the first boss in Vortex Pinnacle. You guys just saw me do that dungeon. Look at all of these things you have to dodge, right? You got orbs to your left, you got orbs to your right, you got orbs behind you, you got orbs in front of you. There's nowhere to go. If you're not really careful on this boss, you're gonna die. So in a lot of cases, people just choose to not Fell Rush, even though they have momentum talented. It's like, okay, I'm just going to take a hit. I'm just not going to do 8% extra damage. Things like this, I think people overlook, especially people that play other classes. I don't think they realize the struggles that we deal with. Even thinking, like I'm currently progging Mythic Sarkareth, right? There are so many swirlies in phase 1, and they're all kind of grouped around the boss. I might be able to put some footage on top of this part of the video so you can see what I'm talking about, but there's just swirlies everywhere. And it makes it really challenging to Fell Rush. And then you see other people in your raid team, like, you know, the Ret Paladins, who are just kind of, you know, cruising along. They backpedal a little bit if they need to. They just rotate to the other side of the boss if they need to. But here we are, having to plan a dash in some safe direction every 6 seconds. And we have to think about how we're going to Vengeful Retreat backwards, you know, every 20 seconds. And still maintain our position for that boss because you have to bait the breath in a certain direction. So it's pretty complicated, and it's really, like I said earlier, it's tiring. The APM required has skyrocketed, and Havoc has become one of the most active specs to play. What I mean by this is how many buttons you're pressing in an encounter. When I say active, it's like, are you constantly pressing a button? Is it required of you to be constantly pressing some type of button? Or are there little breaks in your rotation where you can kind of relax and, you know, assess the situation and then pick back up. But for Havoc, it's constant. The APM required, like I said, has skyrocketed. So challenge is great and welcomed. Like, I wouldn't want to play a class and a spec that's just so easy that there's no reward from playing it, right? Like, I think it's just human nature to want to do something challenging, and the reward that you get from doing that challenging thing feels even greater to you when you put more effort in to achieve it. You know, it's like when you play a video game when you were a kid, right? You would look up cheat codes for this game. You'd be really excited to do it at first because you're like, oh, this is so easy. Look, I'm in God mode. I can just kill everything. But that doesn't last for very long, right? Eventually, probably about a day later, you're like, oh, okay, well, it's just ruined the game for me because now I've done everything there is to do. I've killed every boss there is. I didn't even really earn it. At least that was my experience with video games as a kid. The problem ultimately is just that it feels unrewarding to put so much effort in only to get half the results of others. And this is reflected in the DPS charts that Raider.io and Warcraft logs compiles. Every week they kind of compare the DPS output of all different specs and how they're performing in Raid. And Havoc is never near the top. Not that it has to be near the top all the time, but it's been a constant drop. Every consecutive time, it's like Havoc is getting just a little bit worse every time. That leads us into public perception. It's been a running joke for as long as I've played the spec. I started, when did I start? The very end of Legion. Legion and BFA is kind of where I really picked it up. The running joke has been that, you know, Havoc has 2 buttons. You just slam those 2 buttons. How hard can it really be? Which is completely wrong now. It's quite the opposite. Like I said earlier, it's probably the most involved and hardest melee spec to grasp, not only as a new player, but just as a regular player. It's a lot to sort of digest and understand. This is just a quick look at our rotation. I'm curious to know if other classes, like other class discords or something, have rotations that are this like fleshed out and have so much detail. Let me know in the comments, because I can't imagine that they are anything like this. What I'm trying to say is it's a very, very complicated and convoluted rotation that is the opposite of what people think it is. And people who haven't really put any research into the spec see us complaining about the spec with that, because like they think that we just have it easy. Like, what are we complaining about? We're a 2-button spec. We have nothing to complain about. It's just not the case anymore. It's just not. Isolated prey. It requires a single target to be effective. We also take Fodder, which adds a target every 1 minute and nullifies the effect of isolated prey, rendering it useless. Isolated prey reinforces Fell Rush by making it a generator, so you Fell Rush on CD whether you take momentum or not. This is a common misconception with people who have come back to the spec and hear that, okay, maybe there is an alternative where you don't take momentum, and they automatically assume that means that they're not going to be Fell Rushing, right? They can save their Fell Rushes for mechanics. Unfortunately, because of this talent, that isn't the case. Because as you can see, this bottom part, Fell Rush generates 25 to 35 Fury. That's a lot of Fury every 6 seconds. Essentially what that means is you're going to be using Fell Rush as your Fury generator instead of your Fellblade, right? Instead of your Immolation Aura. You're not pressing those anymore. It's much more convenient to just Fell Rush because it's like half a GCD and you just get Fury. All of these no movement, sort of no mover build that you might be hearing about, in reality, they're not technically no mover build. Not just because of this, but also because you kind of have to take initiative. Initiative forces you to Vengeful Retreat on cooldown because you're getting so much critical strike every time you use VR, and critical strike is how we do our damage. With Know Your Enemy, you gain critical strike damage equal to 80% of your critical strike chance. So you can't really afford to just not get 12% extra crit chance every 20 seconds. It's a hindrance to your damage. There's no way you can make up for that with any other combination of talents. In reality, there is no true no mover build that is comparable. So back to Fodder to the Flame. The RNG just feels horrible. It's a bit better now than it used to be in Shadowlands. I don't find myself getting as frustrated with it now, but it's still it's very hard to work around. You don't always get it when you need it. So for example, if you get a demon that procs on pull on your opener on a raid boss, if you get it like proccing right on pull and you get that buff, you really notice it on the meters that you get that extra damage boost. And when you don't get it on pull, you notice that as well. You know, you're not at the top, leaving everyone in the dust. You're struggling to keep up. The problem with Fodder to the Flame is that even though it's completely RNG, the 20% damage amp is just way too good to give up. It's a weird catch-22 because the only other option in that node is Leasing Decree, which truthfully just kind of sucks. And there's other aspects to Fodder to the Flame that make it even harder to give up. Like the healing that you get from it is insane. It's essentially like a second reactive cooldown that you can use. There's a lot of times where I find myself in a situation where, you know, my health is getting pretty low on a raid boss, and I don't have Blur, I don't have a health pot, I don't have a health stone, but hey, what do you know, a demon just spawned, so I can glaive it down and get a little bit of health back. But that's just it. You don't know when this demon's gonna spawn. You can kind of guess roughly that, you know, you get one per minute, essentially, but it's still really hard to time and it's hard to predict. It's like having a defensive and it's having a damage cooldown, but you can't really play around it. The other thing, like I mentioned, is it interacts oddly with Isolated Prey. This talent, Isolated Prey, that we were talking about only works when you're fighting one target. So you're fighting a single target raid boss, right? And then you proc Fodder to the Flame and you have a demon. Suddenly now you have two targets. And it completely nullifies Isolated Prey. You don't get these benefits until you kill the demon, and then you can go back to it. It's a blessing and a curse, those demons. The other thing with Fodder to the Flame is they just evade. They'll spawn, and you'll see them in front of you, but the first hit on them evades, and because that first hit is evading, you're technically not proccing initiative off of it, and then you just can't get initiative, because it thinks you already hit it, but you didn't, so there's a lot of weird interactions with this. The next problem is giving up damage for defensives. So our major defensive CD, Netherwalk, and our single target stun, Fell Eruption, are locked behind a roughly 2 to 4% damage loss. And because of that, I haven't taken Netherwalk once this expansion. You know, Netherwalk used to be a lock-in for me, and it was always kind of fun to find places to use Netherwalk, to find mechanics I could cheese with Netherwalk. But now it's just, there's no way I can afford giving up that damage just to take it. If we go to this spreadsheet, this isn't like 100% accurate anymore. I don't think this was updated for a little while. Last updated June 3rd, but essentially you can see the standard build is right here. And if we decide to take Netherwalk, it's a loss of 1.86% DPS. If we decide to take Fell Eruption, that's a negative 4.06% DPS. That's such a hit to our damage that you just can't really justify it. Typically in a Mythic Plus, it's just not something you can really afford to do. Boomkins had this issue early on, going into Dragonflight. They had an issue where they had to give up a pretty substantial talent to take their solar beam thing, and they complained about it and it got fixed. I don't know why it hasn't been fixed for us. Those two talents got moved. They used to be further down. They got moved up closer to the top of the tree, and that didn't solve anything. It just made it even harder, to be honest. I hope that can get sorted soon because I would really love to take those talents. A single target stun in Mythic Plus is so valuable. If you played Shadowlands, if you played BFA, you guys know how awesome Netherwalk is. Now, going on to our single target damage. As a spec, we have very clearly distinct builds. We have single target, we have a cleave build, which I guess it kind of bleeds into our single target now, and we have an AoE build. Our single target is still falling extremely short, despite buffs, and we can only be buffed in very specific minor ways without also buffing our AoE. So the way they've been trying to maneuver that is they buff things like our Demon's Bite damage, our auto attack damage, our Demon Blades damage, you know, all these minor things like our Fell Blade damage, all these minor abilities that are getting these minor buffs 3-4 times over, hoping it'll be just enough to like increase our single target DPS, but it's just not cutting it. And the other things that they could buff, like our Blade Dance, unfortunately, if you buff that, it increases our AoE as well. I get that it's a struggle to try to balance it, but there has to be some solution. The 2-point talent, Cycle of Hatred, which gates our single target capstone, is very punishing. So that is this one here. Blade Dance, Chaos Strike, and Glaive Tempest reduce the cooldown of I-Beam by 1 second. It's a 2-pointer, and that is the gate node going into Shattered Destiny. Spending Fury reduces the cooldown on I-Beam. This means that any forced downtime severely hurts our bottom line by limiting our expected CD reduction. In single target, that's the whole way that our damage works, is we're spending Fury to reduce the cooldown on I-Beam, so we can I-Beam and get back into Demonic or stay into Demonic longer. If things happen that force us to stop hitting the boss, not only are we just losing damage like any other class and spec in the game would, right? If you're not hitting the boss, you're not doing damage. Sure. But each time we don't hit the boss, it reduces our potential to do damage in the future, right? In the next like minute. Somebody did Sims. I don't have the exact numbers, but it was like one missed GCD every 1 minute was like accumulated over the course of a raid fight, and it accounted for like a 2k loss of your overall damage. 2,000 damage just chopped off your overall at the end from one missed GCD, 1 minute. So you can imagine an average player, or maybe even a newer player, they're missing a ton of GCDs. So you can put 2 and 2 together, and they're losing a lot of damage. But yeah, other specs, other DPS classes, they just have their cooldowns that they can like maybe hold on to and then pop them after the forced downtime, and they can catch back up. Or if you're like just a completely sustained class, then you're losing damage for that split second that you're forced to not attack the boss. But thus, it's like, yes, we're not attacking, but then we're also losing damage later. So we're put in a perpetual state of catch-up. That's the best way I can put it. So all of this contributes to a frustrating experience and has pushed many players away from the spec. So I have some data to show this as well. I have this chart here, and I know this might look like a melted box of crayons, but just hear me out here. This is the top 2,000 Mythic Plus runs for each week, and we're going from top to bottom, right? So this is kind of showing like the class meta as well. So you can see up here, this is us here. The purple, we were pretty well represented, right? Went down and down and down, and right about here, you can start to see a drop off. Less people started playing, and right here, it got really, really bad. It just kept getting worse, kept getting worse, kept getting worse, and now look at us down here. Barely anyone's playing Havoc. And then we hit the weird augmentation evoker meta, and you know, we all know how that went. But you can see the pretty hard drop off of people who probably used to love playing Havoc, and for all the reasons I just listed, just got fed up with it and re-rolled, started playing something else. You can see a lot of people went to Shadow Priest. Shadow Priest bar got pretty large. And also, just from my end, you know, as a content creator who makes content on Havoc Demon Hunter, I'm seeing things like this, right? Why are views lower than usual? Fewer viewers watched your channel from YouTube search results when fewer people are interested in the topic. So essentially, less people are searching for Havoc Demon Hunter content now, which I think is a direct correlation with, are people playing the spec? Are people interested in learning the spec? Unfortunately, I think not. I think people are just frustrated with it and they've moved on. That's my take on the state of Havoc Demon Hunter. There's a lot of things wrong with it. There's a lot of things that could be fixed. But I'm hoping will be fixed in the near future. I think we're still waiting on the Rogue rework that was promised to us coming into 10.1.5. That hasn't happened yet. So my guess is that once we see the Rogue changes come through, I think then they'll probably be open to taking a look at Havoc. Fingers crossed, giving us what we need. Yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments, guys. Have you moved on from Havoc? If you have, and you're still watching my videos, tell me why you're still watching. I appreciate you watching, but help me understand where you guys are at. Let me know your thoughts. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I will catch you next time. Peace.